tonight, we're not drifting off into a world of kings and castles. No noble feasts or fairy tale towers. Instead, we're slipping quietly into the back alleys and foul-smelling streets of a place both distant and familiar. Medieval London, but this isn't just any version of the city it's once seen through the eyes of its most invisible and burdened inhabitants. Women, close your eyes now, let the sounds of the present melt away. Let the world dim just a little, until all that's left is a low hum, maybe the slow clop of a cartwheel on stone, or the quiet hiss of a cooking pot over coals. Maybe you hear babies crying in the distance. Maybe you smell the thick, choking scent of something rotten in the street, mixing with wood smoke and sour wine. Don't worry, it will all settle into a kind of dull, blurry dream. You are not you. Tonight, you are someone else, a woman, young, perhaps, maybe 17 or 18, already middle-aged by the city's standards. Your life has been a long line of aching limbs, cold feet, and unwashed clothes. But this is normal for you. This is life in London, sometime in the 1300s or 1400s. It's just before dawn, and your eyes open before the church bell rings. You sleep on a sack stuffed with straw that smells faintly of mildew. You share the room with two sisters and your younger cousin, all wrapped tightly in wool blankets to fight off the chill. There is no window glass, just a wooden shutter that doesn't quite close. The wind sneaks through the cracks and whispers over your bare feet. Your first task of the day is to dump the chamber pot. Yes, the one used through the night. The one full to the top. You step quietly over your cousin's sleeping body and lift the heavy pot by the handle. You slide open the creaky shutter just enough to peer outside. No one is on the alley below, so you pour the contents out into the street. It lands with a dull splash on the cobblestones below, just one more puddle in a street already full of human waste. Horse dung and rainwater dot outside. The city is waking up. Somewhere a cart creaks as a baker delivers stale loaves. A pair of rats scurry across a barrel. A cat hisses and disappears into a broken fence. The smell in the air is thickiest blood, rotting vegetables, soot, something sweet and sour all at once. You don't wrinkle your nose. You don't even notice anymore. Breakfast, if you're lucky, will be pottage, some old barley, maybe a turnip, maybe not. There's no coffee, no tea, just a sip of watered-down ale or perhaps a bit of sour milk. You chew slowly and feel your stomach tighten, already preparing for a day of hard work. If you're a laundress, your hands are already cracked and raw from the lye and ash you use to clean clothes. Washing is a brutal task. You walk down to the Thames with a heavy wooden tub on your hip. You squat by the water, your skirt hiked up to your knees, and beat the garments with a paddle. Some women use stale urine-cooled chamber lies, kind of detergent. The ammonia cuts through stains, but the smell clings to your skin long after the clothes are hung to dry. And no, there is no soap, not the kind you know. Just ash, sand, and hope. If you're married, you're probably already pregnant. Again, you count the moons, rub your belly and worry. Childbirth is a roll of the dice. No doctors, no anesthesia, just other women and prayers. You may live, you may not. The baby may be healthy or not. You don't ask questions. You just breathe and carry on. And if it's not childbirth, it's your monthly bleeding. There's no comfort here either. No pads, no tampons, just folded rags, often reused, tucked awkwardly between layers of linen. The smell is embarrassing, and if you're caught with stained clothing, people will talk. You might be cursed, laughed at. Worse, you might be blamed for everything from a spoiled brew to a dead goat. People say blood makes women unstable, dirty, dangerous. Public shame is everywhere. If you're caught shouting too loudly, a man might call you a scold, and scolds can be punished, tied to a post and mocked. Or worse, forced into the scold's bridle, an iron muzzle that locks around your head, with a plate that presses down on your tongue. You can't speak. You can barely swallow. The crowds will point and laugh. Your crime, being loud, being opinionated, being a woman. Your body isn't really your own. Not in the eyes of the city, the church, or the law. If your husband beats you, no one will stop him. If you're unmarried and caught alone with a man, even in innocence, you might be labeled a whore. And heaven help you if you're poor and pretty. Men see your hunger, your torn clothes, your desperation, and they take advantage, then cast you aside. Your only chance of protection is marriage, but marriage is rarely love, it's survival. A man may take you on as a wife if your father has a trade to offer, or if your hips look strong for birthing. You might get a pair of shoes in the deal, maybe a comb, maybe not. If you're a servant, you work from dawn to dusk, hauling, scrubbing, carrying, kneading, nursing, mending. You sleep in the kitchen, or on straw behind the stable. You aren't allowed to marry without permission, and if you get pregnant out of wedlock, you'll be thrown out. And if you're a sex worker, which many women become not by choice, but by starvation, you live on the edge of society. You wear yellow hoods, so everyone knows what you are. You're excluded from churches. You can't be buried in holy ground. You may die young, of disease or violence. And yet, your clients will be men of every class, from fishmongers to aldermen. The street itself is dangerous. At night, it belongs to thieves, drunkards, and shadows. The constables do little. There are no lamps, just darkness and fear. You grip your cloak tightly and walk quickly, hoping not to be noticed. When it rains, the streets flood with filth. The gutters overflow and waste pours down into the Thames. You step carefully, trying not to slip, but sometimes you do. Everyone does, and still you endure. You gather water from the public fountain, careful not to spill a drop. You stand in line for bread or dried fish. You barter for a bit of wool to mend your only dress. You care for your siblings, your children, your neighbors. You light the fire. You sweep the floor. You clean the wounds. You laugh sometimes, too, quietly in secret. You whisper stories with other women while sewing in a circle. You sing old songs while you work. You smile when the bread rises just right. You hold your baby's fingers and forget the pain, just for a moment. But even then, London is hard, and being a woman, that makes it harder. Let yourself drift now. Feel the weight of that life settle into your bones, the chill of the air, the ache of your muscles, the dim gray skies that never seem to break, the endless labor, the quiet suffering, and yet, through it all, the women endure, just as you are enduring this slow, quiet descent into sleep. Let's stay here a little longer. Let your body sink into stillness. The story continues, slow and quiet, like an autumn fog creeping through crooked city streets. The sky over medieval London is low and colorless. Clouds drift like worn linen above the towers of Newgate Prison, one of the oldest and most feared buildings in the city. Built into the city wall, it is a squat, brooding mass of stone, its windows narrow and barred, its air thick with damp and despair. And inside, locked behind one of those heavy oak doors, is a woman named Alice. Alice Tankerville. We know her name because she made the kind of mistake that society couldn't forgive. She stole. But before the trial, before the execution, before her name became a warning, Alice was just another woman in London. Some say she worked as a servant in a wealthy household. Others whispered that she sold herbs and trinkets down by St. Paul's. She might have had a husband, she might have been alone. All we know is that, one day, in the year 1534, she was caught with stolen goods, a bolt of silk and some silver spoons. Silk was precious then, imported from across the sea. Only the upper classes could afford it, and wearing it without permission was considered not just theft but rebellion. Alice claims she found the goods, that someone else had hidden them in her basket, that she was innocent, but it didn't matter. She was dragged through the streets, past crowds who pointed and jeered. She was locked in Newgate, a place so foul that even the rats tried to leave. The walls inside were slick with moisture. The air reeked of sweat, sickness, and rotting straw. Prisoners were packed together, men and women, murderers and petty thieves, all breathing the same heavy air. There were no cells with beds, no courtyards, no guards with clean uniforms. If you wanted food, you had to buy it. If you wanted water, you had to beg for it. Alice had nothing, just the dress on her back and the rumors that began to swirl around her. You see, Alice wasn't quiet. She spoke up, protested. She refused to confess. Some say she argued with the guards. Others say she stared them down with cold defiance. That was dangerous for a woman. In court, she stood before the judge, her head bowed, her hands bound. The officials read her charges: grand larceny, the punishment, death by hanging. She wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. Executions were public, meant to entertain, and warn. On the day of her hanging, the crowd gathered early. People brought their children. They stood on barrels, climbed on walls, craned their necks to get a better view. Vendors sold pastries and ale. It was like a festival, except that someone was about to die. Alice was led out in chains, her feet bare, her dress ragged. She had been kept in a dark cell for weeks. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken, but she did not cry. At Tyburn, the gallows stood like a skeleton against the grey sky. It was called the Triple Tree, a three-beamed structure used for mass hangings. They said it could hang 20 people at once. The rope was coarse, scratchy. It was thrown around her neck. The priest mumbled his blessing. The crowd leaned in, and then silence. A drop, a twitch, and stillness. Alice Tankerville was gone, but something lingered. Her story, the injustice, the weight of it all, because men who stole were often pardoned, given second chances, sent to war or branded instead. But women, especially poor women, they were seen as dangerous. Their independence was suspicious. Their hunger, literal and metaphorical, was threatening, and so they were made examples of. Even in death, Alice was treated differently. Her body wasn't buried in consecrated ground. It was tossed into a pauper's pit. No marker, no prayers, just forgotten. Except of course, she wasn single quotes too. Over time her name would appear in records, in whispered legends, a woman who refused to stay silent, a woman who paid the price, and she wasn't alone. Hundreds of women's events, widows, mothers, were punished not just for crimes, but for stepping outside their place. Some were branded with hot irons, some were paraded through the streets, with signs around their necks. Some were locked in public cages, left for days in the cold. There was the ducking stool used for gossips, and scolds women who spoke too freely or argued too loudly. They were tied to a wooden chair and dunked into freezing water again and again, until they gasped or stopped moving. There was the pillory where a woman's hands and head were locked in wooden boards as people threw garbage, spit, and stones. Sometimes she lost an eye, sometimes she never stood again. There was the walking shame forced to wear a white shift and marched barefoot through the city, with a placard describing her supposed scenes, cheating, gossip, promiscuity, even disobedience. But through it all, women endured, like Alice. And long after the crowd dispersed, long after the gallows were dismantled and the prison crumbled, her story drifts quietly through time, a soft thread in the heavy tapestry of London's past. Maybe, tonight, she walks those cobbled streets still, a whisper in the wind, a name in the mist. Alice. Let her name lull you now. Let the noise fade. Let the shadows of old London wrap gently around your thoughts. You are not on trial here. You are only a listener, a dreamer, a quiet witness to history. Sleep comes slowly, like fog, like memory. The fire is low now. The world is still. You've followed the sound of footsteps through the alleys of medieval London, past the prison gates, past the pillories and stocks, past the dying embers of a tallow candle left too long in the window. You're slipping deeper now into a softer place. A darker one, not darker in fear, but darker like the velvet of a starless sky. A place where secrets hum just beneath the surface. Here in this quiet, let us turn inward into the minds of the women of medieval London. Women who may have been feared, misunderstood, or simply ignored. You might be surprised to know that, for many women in this time, the only power they ever truly held came not from marriage, or the church, or the law, but from knowledge. Strange knowledge. Secret things passed from mother to daughter. Remedies, rituals, beliefs. Let's begin. In a small wooden room near the edge of sun. It smells faintly of dried rosemary and boiled nettle. Hanging from the rafters are bundles of herbs, mugwort, yarrow, and lady's mantle. On a shelf, a bowl of tallow, a small wooden comb, and a worn book with no title. This is a home, and it is sacred. The midwife is not a rich woman. She owns no land, but she knows the turning of the moon. She understands the tide of the womb. She's helped dozens, maybe hundreds of babies enter the world. She knows when a woman is in true labor, and when she is not. She knows when blood is dangerous, and when it's just part of the cycle. She makes teas from raspberry leaves. To ease cramps, she brews infusions of valerian to calm fear. She carries a pouch of rue for protection. Her fingers are calloused, her voice calm. She prays sometimes, but more often, she whispers charms. But the world around her is changing. The church frowns upon such women now. They say healing comes only from God, that anything else, especially women's magic, is suspect, dangerous, possibly heretical. Some midwives are arrested, others are questioned, a few are tortured, and yet, many continue, quietly, carefully, in secret. One such midwife, they say, carves strange symbols into her doorframe, marks shaped like spirals and W's. These are witch marks, protective symbols meant to ward off evil. They can still be found today, scratched into beams and stone near hearths and chimneys. Were they meant to keep demons out, or simply misfortune? No one knows for sure, but for the women of London, the fear of being labeled a witch was real. Older women, especially widows, were often accused. If she lived alone, if she had a cat, if a neighbor's cow died after a quarrel, suspicion followed her like smoke. There was Agnes, the alewife. Her brew was too good, too strong. Some said she added strange things to her barrels, nettles, even fingernail clippings. They said she had a black bird who whispered in her ear. One day, a boy fell sick after drinking from her cup. Agnes was dragged from her stall and tied to a stake. She was never seen again. And Joan, the healer, she knew how to set bones and ease fevers. She'd treated dozens with her herbal ointment. But then, a magistrate's son died under her care. They blamed her, called her a witch. Her name vanished from the records. That there was no fire in England for witches, not like on the continent. But shame was its own kind of burning. Once accused, a woman rarely recovered. People crossed the street to avoid her. Children threw stones. She might starve or disappear. Even menstruation was wrapped in fear and misunderstanding. People believed that a woman's monthly bleeding could sour milk, cause bread to fall, or dull a blade. Some said that menstrual blood held magical properties. It could be used in love charms or curses. There were whispered tales of women using it to bind men or to hex rivals. No one knew if it was true, but everyone was afraid. Yet in the privacy of women's circles, a different kind of magic lived. Women passed down knowledge through song and rhyme. They taught each other how to calculate their fertile days by moonlight, how to chew willow bark for headaches, how to use honey and moss as wound dressings. They stitched little charms into the hems of baby clothes, small crosses, tiny runes, just in case. They made dolls from straw and ribbon. Some were for play, others perhaps not. Some were buried beneath doorways or hung above cradles. Protection, they said. There was power in hair, in breath, in nails. A lover's token, a curse, ingredient, or simply superstition. And dreams mattered. If a woman dreamed of fire, it meant danger. If she dreamed of teeth falling out, someone would die. If she dreamed of drowning, a secret was being kept. In a world where so much was uncertainty, war, poverty, these beliefs were not foolish. They were anchors. They gave women meaning, agency, and control. Of course, not all women believed. Many feared such practices. Many prayed fervently, attended church, kept their heads down, but even the most devout might still tie a red thread around their wrists during childbirth, just in case, because you never knew. Maybe the wind really did carry whispers. Maybe the dark corners of the street did hide more than rats. Maybe the woman who lived near the well, with her mismatched eyes and strange laughter, maybe she did know things no one else did. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The mayor's wife sits by the window. She is dressed in fine wool, lined with fur, and a girdle of gold chain rests across her waist. Her shoes are soft leather. Her head is covered in a linen veil, pinned neatly beneath a crisp, white wimple. Her hands are folded in her lap. They do not shake. But if you looked closer than you're meant to, you might notice that her knuckles are red, as though from being gripped too tightly. You might see the tiny pinpricks of needle blisters along her fingertips, or the raw skin beneath the line of her collar. You see, wealth in medieval London did not mean freedom, not for women. In fact, for many, it meant a cage with softer walls. The mayor's wife cannot leave the house without a male escort, not unless she's going to church, and even then, it must be with approval. She cannot speak in public. Her voice belongs to her husband. Her opinions are not her own. She hosts dinner parties. Yes, she curtsies, she pours wine. She makes polite conversation with aldermen's wives and tradesmen's daughters. But she does not laugh too loudly. She does not frown. She does not let her shoulders sag. And most of all, she does not cry. Her days are filled with quiet labor, embroidery, mostly. Hours and hours of it. Her hands ache, her back stiffens, but she does not complain. She embroiders gifts for church, officials, altar cloths, the initials of her husband on silk pillowcases. Sometimes she embroiders birds, sometimes roses. She stitches in silence. Meals are a performance. The household eats in order of rank. She supervises, but does not overstep. If the meat is overcooked, it is her shame. If the bread is underbaked, it is her responsibility. She does not cook, but she must know how everything is done so that if it goes wrong, she knows whom to punish. She bathes, sometimes if the weather allows and the tub can be brought in. The water is perfumed with herbs. But the servants see her body, they whisper. She wraps herself quickly in cloth. Her skin must never be too pale, then she looks sick. But it must never be sun-dark either, then she looks common. Her hair is never seen. It is pinned, covered, and hidden. A woman who shows her hair is inviting attention. She is vain. She is dangerous. At night, she lies beside her husband. He is older, sometimes gentle, sometimes not. His breath smells of wine and meat. She does not flinch. She lies still. This is what marriage means. There are no choices, there are no questions, only duty. She has had 5 children. 3 died before the age of 2. The 4th is sickly. The 5th, her only daughter, was promised to another merchant's son at the age of 9. She weeps, sometimes, when the house is quiet, but only when the candles are out. Her tears are her own, she does not share them. She attends church every week. She kneels, she prays, she donates, she fasts. When told, she thanks God for her station. She is told that to be born a woman is a punishment, that Eve sinned first, that obedience is holy, that silence is sacred. She believes it, or tries to. But late at night, when the wind howls through the chimney, and the fire has burned low, she sits up in bed and thinks of other things. She remembers the books in her father's study books she was not allowed to read. She remembers a time before marriage, before the veil, when she rode horses and chased sparrows across the garden, when she spoke too loudly, when she laughed without shame. That she remembers a girl she once knew, a maid named Ellen, who used to sing while scrubbing the floor. Ellen disappeared one day. No one ever said why. The mayor's wife still hums that song sometimes, quietly, under her breath, and she wonders, what if she had run away? What if she had refused the marriage? What if she had said no? But those thoughts are dangerous. They curl like smoke in the corners of her mind, and so she folds them away, like old letters. She smooths the covers. She lays back down. She sleeps. Not every woman in London lived in filth. Not every woman begged for bread or died in childbirth. Some wore silk and smelled of roses. But even silk can suffocate. Even roses have thorns. And sometimes, the quietest cages are the hardest to escape. Let that truth settle over you now like the hush of falling snow. Let the final flicker of candlelight fade into shadow. Let the silk curtain fall. You've walked through every corner of medieval London tonight. From the laundress to the thief. From the midwife to the mayor's wife. Their lives were hard. Their voices were quiet, but they were real. And they mattered. And though the streets they walked have long since crumbled, their stories remain. And now, dear listener, your story can fade too. Not into history, but into sleep. Let into sleep. Let your body grow heavy. Let your thoughts soften. Let the old city drift away like mist over the Thames. You are safe now. You are still, and it is time to rest. Good night. Now you're about to listen to another soft, sad story in the same style as Why It Sucked to Be a Woman in Medieval London. It's meant to help you sleep, but also to drift with you into a past that was real dark in parts, quiet in others, and always more complicated than it seems on the surface. If you've listened before, you know how we go. No loud music, no harsh narration, just slow, steady storytelling that pulls you gently into forgotten corners of time. So take a breath, let the day fall away, let the blankets hold you. Let the room grow still. And now, let's step into a world that still echoes, quietly, through the soil of the American South. This is the story of what it was like to live just one day as a woman on a southern plantation. Not the woman on the porch in lace and perfume, but the one who woke before dawn, the one who carried, served, obeyed, the one who was owned, and the one who still found ways to survive. The world is still black when she wakes. There is no sun yet, no birds, just the low guttural moan of someone coughing in the next cabin. A child, maybe, or an elder whose lungs never fully healed from last winter. The woman blinks, her body aches, the thin blanket she used has fallen to the dirt floor. The wooden boards beneath her creak as she reads eyes carefully so as not to wake the others. There are 7 people in the cabin, and only room for 3 to lie down properly. The rest curl along the edges, tucked like scrolls. She wraps her arms around herself, then ties a strip of cloth around her waist. Her dress is the same one she wore yesterday and the day before. The cotton is coarse thin in places, and the seams are held together by uneven stitches. She does not own it, just like she does not own her name. Outside, the morning is thick with stillness. The ground is cold. There is no fire yet. The others are beginning to stir, quietly, automatically. No one speaks. They don't need to. They all know what time it is. Time to start before the overseer walks by. Time to move before the horn sounds. Time to show, once again, that they are ready. When their bodies are not, she steps out into the dim blue dark. The plantation stretches around her in every direction, fields of cotton still sleeping under the mist. Long rows of trees, wooden barns, a great house that glows faintly with oil lamps in the upper windows. That house, that white-columned 2-story house, stands on a rise. It looks like it belongs in a painting. Ivy wraps around the side. There's a garden in the back with roses. And sometimes, on Sundays, the family has picnics there. The wife wears gloves. The daughter plays piano. The son rides a new pony. But she does not look at that house for long, she never does. Instead, she walks to the pump. She draws cold water in a dented tin pail. She rinses her face, her hands. Then she helps another woman get the cookhouse fire going. The kitchen is separate from the big house. It's a square brick structure set, just far enough away to keep the smells from drifting in through the master's windows. Inside the kitchen, it's dark and already hot. She starts the bread first, then the grits, then the salt pork. She knows exactly how the master likes his eggs, not because he told her but because she once made them wrong, and he didn't speak to her. He just stood there, watching until she made them again. The heat from the stove sticks to her skin. Her apron is damp with sweat before the sun even rises. Then she carries the food up the short path to the big house. She doesn't knock, she doesn't speak. She enters through the side door. Always the side door. She doesn't look up when she sees the mistress of the house. The mistress is already dressed, her corset laced tightly, her hair done by another servant, an older woman whose hands now tremble when she pins the curls. The mistress doesn't say good morning, she just nods toward the dining room. The woman lays the plates out gently. One wrong move, one clatter of silverware, and the master will give her that look again, the one that isn't angry, the one that's bored, and that's worse, because it means she isn't worth his attention, until she is. She lowers her eyes and retreats, back to the kitchen, back to the fire. Outside, the other women are gathering for the day's field assignments. Many of them carry baskets. Some are pregnant, some have infants strapped to their backs. The babies will cry under the sun. The mothers won't stop working. She is not in the field today, she's been told to clean. The master's daughter is having guests. That means scrubbing floors, washing linens, polishing silver, heating water for hand, gathering mint for the tea tray. It means smiling, but not too much. It means disappearing when they speak, but appearing instantly when they snap. It means being seen, but never acknowledged. The day stretches on like a whip crack held in slow motion. The heat swells, the children are restless, the guests laugh too loudly. The mistress frowns because the towels are not folded the way she likes them. And still, she moves, she wipes, lifts, serves, adjusts. The dress she wears is soaked through at the back. She cannot stop to dry it. The child she is tending on her shoulder, she cleans it quietly. She is not the nursemaid today, but the real nursemaid was sent to the smokehouse for punishment. She does not ask why, you do not ask. By sunset, her body is 1,000 small aches. Her feet throb, her head rings with noise. She hasn't eaten more than a heel of bread since morning, but there is still more to do. The water for the upstairs baths must be heated. The chickens need closing in. The ashes in the fire pit must be cleared, and someone must sit up late to watch the mistress's baby while she naps before supper. She will sit there, rocking the child she did not bear, humming a song that does not belong to her, wearing a name that was given by someone else. And tomorrow she will do it all again. So tonight, as you lie in your bed, safe, warm, free to dream, remember her. Not as a number in a history book, not as a shadow behind a curtain, but as a woman who lived and worked and was never truly seen. A woman who woke before the sun and did not sleep until the stars had turned. You wouldn't last a day in her shoes, and she never had a choice. The stars are out now, and the air has cooled. But inside the quarters, behind the big house, the heat still lingers. Not the heat of fire, but of fear. The woman from earlier, the one who rocked the child and folded the napkins and scrubbed the mistress's floor, has finally been allowed to rest. She lies on her side now, her back to the others in the cramped sleeping space. He is not asleep yet, because she's thinking about what happened to Aunt Esther. They call her aunt, though she is not truly anyone's aunt. It's just what the young ones call the oldest among them. And Esther, she is old. No one knows exactly how many years. Some say 70, some say more. She was born on another plantation, far to the east. She has the scars to prove it. And now, she has a new one that had happened earlier in the week, quietly and with no ceremony. As most punishments go here, it wasn't because she ran. Aunt Esther had long since stopped trying to run. Her knees ached too badly. Her breathing was shallow. No, she didn't run. She spoke. She spoke in a way she wasn't meant to. One of the young white girls visiting from Charleston had asked her a question, some idle, flippant thing, and Aunt Esther, who had spent her entire life minding her words, must have let one slip through, a word too bold, to true, too unfiltered. No one heard it clearly, but the girl flushed, blinked, and ran inside. By dusk, the overseer was called. By nightfall, it was done. They did not whip her in the open. Not anymore. The master's guests didn't like the noise, the spectacle. It made the lemonade turn sour in their stomachs. No, Aunt Esther was taken to the back of the smokehouse, where it was quiet, where the trees muffled sound. And in the morning she walked back with a limp and a line of blood on her shift. No one asked what happened. They didn't have to. The younger women cried. One tried to touch her back, gently. Aunt Esther swatted the hand away, not out of anger, but because she didn't want anyone else to suffer. She sat down on the steps of her cabin, and she hummed. That was the worst part. She hummed. The song was one she had carried in her bones since the time before the auction block, before the long ride west, before her name was taken and replaced. She hummed it quietly with her eyes closed, a tune that no one else knew all the words to, a tune that came from the land across the water, the land of her mother and her mother's mother. And somehow, that made it feel even heavier, because in that moment, she wasn't just an old woman with cracked skin and a torn shift. She was something more. Something strong. Something ancient. Something they had failed to break. Aunt Esther was once a field hand, strong, fast, she could pick cotton with both hands and outpace the men. But when her back began to stoop, they moved her to the quarters to help with children. She wiped noses, washed tiny feet, and told stories to lull the babies to sleep. She knew dozens of them, tales of spirits that lived in trees, of women who turned into birds, of men who tried to outrun the devil and almost did. The children loved her stories, but the master did not. He said they were heathen nonsense. He said the stories made the children wild. He said that these folk needed the Bible, not bedtime tales. So Aunt Esther stopped telling stories out loud, but she told them anyway, through rhythm, through lullabies, through looks. She was one of the last who remembered what the stars used to mean, one of the few who could still braid messages into a girl's hair directions, warnings, prayers. She was dangerous. And they knew it. When the lash came for her that night, the other women looked away, not because they didn't love her, but because they had to, because even eye contact could be seen as defiance. The next morning, one of the girls brought her water in a wooden cup. Esther drank it slowly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because silence had become its own language, because her pain was a sentence they all understood, and because in that moment, she was not broken, she was witness. Later that week, the master's wife asked if Aunt Esther would like to move inside permanently, to help with laundry and needlework, something gentler for a woman her age, she said with a cold smile. But Esther said no. Softly, clearly, double quotes, no, miss, I'd rather stay. It was the only time she had been allowed a choice in years, and she used it. She stayed in her cabin. She boiled herbs. She sang when no one was around. And every now and then, a girl would sneak in after dark, asking for help with pain, or pregnancy, or fear. And Aunt Esther would listen, and she would help, and she would hum. So tonight, as you rest, remember her. Not just as the woman with scars, but as the one who chose silence over surrender, who chose to stay, who chose not to forget. Her story is not written in books, but it is written in dirt, in song, in breath. And it is written here, now, inside this quiet space where only you and she remain. Breathe in, let it soften, let it drift. You're safe. She is safe now, too. The fire has burned low. The air smells faintly of pine. And somewhere, far off, someone is humming. The nights on the plantation held a different kind of power. By day, everything was controlled, timed, counted, watched. Every step you took had a shadow beside it. Every word had an ear listening. You couldn't breathe without permission, couldn't sit without it being earned. But after dark, when the oil lamps in the big house flickered out, when the last pail was scrubbed and hung, when the children had been quieted with hums and backpats and whispers, then came a small window, a breath, a pocket of freedom. That's when the women gathered, not loudly, not with celebration, quietly, always quietly, behind the cabins, near the edges of the trees. In the furthest corners of the world they were allowed to live in, there, beneath the moonlight, or by the glow of a single coal, carried carefully from a cooked fire. They spoke in voices so low they sounded more like breath than sound. They shared things they couldn't say in daylight, recipes for pain relief, leaves that eased bleeding, sedatives that numbed the sting after punishment, secrets for keeping a baby inside the womb when someone was trying to take it from you. Or just, as often, for letting that baby go before it could be taken. These weren't just old wives' tales. These were acts of survival. They called it root work. Some called it hoodoo. It wasn't magic, not the kind the master's family talked about when they laughed over ghost stories and superstitions. This was something deeper, older, It came from Africa, twisted together with scraps of Christianity and native knowledge, and reshaped to fit a world that didn't want them to live, that it was whispered. Wisdom. It was ritual. It was prayer in a different form, and for the women, it was a lifeline. There was one woman, called Mama Joe by the others. She wasn't old, but she carried herself like someone who knew everything. She could look at a girl's face and tell if her monthly bleeding had stopped. She could sniff a pot and know if a stew would heal a cough or bring on a death. She walked barefoot in the dirt and said she could feel when the soil was angry. She wore a leather pouch around her neck with dried rosemary, a bit of graveyard dirt, and a tiny black feather. No one touched it, no one asked what it did, they just knew it worked. The mistress of the house once had a stillbirth, her third, a girl, born without breath. The doctor came. He blamed the heat, the stress, the woman's delicate constitution, but the white folks whispered something else. They said it was a curse. They said one of the women must have done something buried, something in the garden, or left a dead bird near the porch steps. They said it was the old one, Aunt Esther. They searched her cabin. They found nothing, but after that, Esther was never allowed near the mistress again. Still, a few months later, when the mistress fell sick with a cough that wouldn't leave, it wasn't the white doctor who helped her. It was one of the enslaved women, quietly at night, with a bitter tea brewed from leaves that no one else recognized. The mistress got better. She never said thank you, but the next time that woman walked by, she was not asked to bow. That was something was never spoken of openly. If the master heard of it, there would be consequences. Bibles burned, girls whipped, men chained. But still, it lived. In braided hair that told stories, in ash marks on the doorway, in certain herbs tucked into skirts before sunrise, in dirt rubbed into the soles of children's feet before they stepped out into the cotton fields. It lived in rhythm. In clapping songs, in caland response lullabies that seemed simple on the surface, but carried messages deeper than English could hold. They taught the children to sing, follow the drinking gourd, not just because it was pretty, but because it was a map, way north. A way out. But not everyone believed. Some were too afraid. Others had forgotten the old ways. Some thought the only way to survive was to be still, to obey, to wait. But there were always those like Mama Joe, like Aunt Esther who remembered, who passed the knowledge down like a tiny, flickering flame cupped between trembling hands. And in doing so, they kept a part of themselves alive. So tonight, as your own room grows still, as your thoughts begin to drift like soft smoke through the cracks in your day, remember this. Not all resistance is loud. Sometimes it looks like a song. Sometimes it smells like crushed mint. Sometimes it's a feather in a pocket, or a scar shaped like a question mark. These women were never taught to read, but they read the world better than anyone, and they wrote their story not with ink, but with hands, and heat, and hush. You are hearing it now. Let it lull you, let it guide you, and let it sleep inside your chest, where the quiet things live. The White House at the top of the rise shimmered in the heat. From the fields it looked like a mansion of marble gleaming columns, lace curtains, soft music sometimes drifting out the windows. It was the picture of peace and wealth, the image used on invitation cards and town letters. But inside was a different story. Inside lived a woman in a cage. Her name was Evelyn, though no one called her that except her sister in letters. To everyone else, she was Mrs. Leclerc, master's wife. She was not poor. She was not enslaved. She had pearls, portraits, a fainting couch trimmed in gold thread, but she also had no voice, not in the way that mattered. Evelyn had married at 19. She had been promised at 16. The man was older, wealthier, and ambitious. His land had been newly expanded. He needed a wife who could host parties, bear sons, and hold her tongue. Evelyn had done all three, but mostly she bore 3 children. One died in infancy. One was sent to boarding school in Charleston. The last, a daughter, remained at home thin, pale, and always just slightly ill. She did host the parties. She decorated the house, coordinated the silverware, reminded the cook not to overboil the pudding, taught her daughter French hymns, and made sure the enslaved girls wore shoes when guests were around. She smiled, she nodded, she poured the tea, but in private. Evelyn wept. Every evening after supper, when her husband retired to the study and the child was tucked into bed, she sat at her vanity. The room smelled of lavender oil and powdered rice. She would remove her earrings slowly, undo her corset ribbon, buy ribbon. Brush her hair 100 times. And stare at herself in the mirror, not in vanity but in grief, because she no longer knew who the woman in the mirror was. She had grown up in a house not unlike this one, with rules, with starch, with lace gloves and prayer before every meal. She was taught to walk with books on her head, to never speak of bleeding, to ignore her brother's anger when he snapped his belt against the maid's leg. She was taught to write poems, but not opinions. To sew samplers but never question ledgers. To bow. To sit. To wait. So she had all her life. But still, it stung every time she saw the girl in the mirror fading. Her husband did not beat her, not often, but he controlled everything. Her letters were read, her wardrobe was dictated, her sleep was never uninterrupted by his demands, sometimes by her own thoughts clawing inside her head. She had once tried to speak up when she saw the bruises on the kitchen girl's arms, when she caught the overseer glaring too long at the girl who cleaned her bedchambers, but her husband laughed. He said, "They're not like us, Evelyn. Don't waste your tears on livestock." Livestock. That word made her stomach twist for weeks. She said nothing the next time. And so Evelyn lived behind curtains, in embroidery hoops, in soft music played on the parlor piano while pretending not to hear the cries from the SMOKEHOUSE. She wore perfume that smelled like rosewater. She walked slowly, like a dream. She learned to keep her hands still, even when her soul shook. But, late at night, when the candles had been snuffed and the house was quiet, she would sometimes slip out of bed, wrap a shawl around her NIGHTDRESS, and walk silently out onto the back porch from there. She could see the cabins faintly, small squares of warm light in the distance, like fireflies. She would stand there, and she would weep, not loudly, not desperately, just softly, like the air had grown too heavy to carry, because Evelyn knew, deep in her bones, that she too was not free. Her cage was lined in silk, but it was still a cage. There was a moment, just one that stayed with her all her life. She had gone to the kitchen to fetch her daughter's shawl. The girl had left it near the stove after a baking lesson with the cook. Evelyn found it, and as she turned to leave, she saw the cook, a middle-aged woman with round cheeks and tired eyes, gently braiding her own child's hair in the corner. The child was humming. And for the briefest moment, Evelyn envied them. The touch, the music, the shared softness. It was more love than she had felt in years. She never spoke of it. She never returned to the kitchen again. But she carried that moment inside her like a stolen gem. Something that wasn't hers but shone in the dark anyway. Evelyn died young, many did. A fever, or perhaps grief. She was buried in white, in the family plot under a stone that read beloved wife and mother. But no one truly knew her. She was not beloved. She was tolerated. She was not known. She was passed between roles. And even now, her story floats somewhere between the rafters of that big house. Wrapped in lace, pressed between diary pages, never opened again. So as you fall asleep tonight, know this: not every prison has iron bars. Sometimes it has velvet curtains, sometimes it wears a corset, sometimes it sings lullabies into an empty room, and the women trapped inside those walls, they wept too, they longed to, they tried to live if only in their dreams. You are free now, but they still wait for someone to remember them, and you just have breathe in. Exhale. Let it settle, let them rest, let you rest.